I'll start with a story. A manager was in a meeting with a client recently. It was an important relationship. The stakes were high, and it was the kind of meeting that he prepared a lot for. In mid-conversation, the client mentioned something in passing, almost as an aside. He said he had a child born with a severe disability, and his family life was quite restricted because of that. They couldn't live where they wanted to, and they couldn't do what other families did. Now, in that moment, that manager froze because he didn't know what to say or how to respond. So he said nothing, and he kept the meeting moving. He stayed on the agenda and got through it, but that awkwardness stayed with him in the room, and it affected the rest of the meeting, how it went. And he felt like it affected the relationship somehow because the client was left wondering, did this guy even hear me? Did he care? Can I trust this person when something real comes up? In a sense, this is what this session is about. It's not about the dramatic blow-ups, not about the HR investigations or the moments where someone brings something that you weren't expecting, but it's about when those moments come and you don't know what to do. So let me ask you something here as we get going. In the last 6 months, have you had a moment like that where someone's brought a strong emotion into the conversation and you didn't know how to respond? Has that happened for you? That's a definite yes from Damien. In that case, you're in the right place because that's our focus here. What we're going to focus on here in this session is the three responses that most managers give that often makes it worse. Why staying calm is the wrong goal and what to aim for instead. The one refrain that shifts how you see difficult people, what's actually happening when you freeze and how to unfreeze, and the confident managers, what they do different in the first 8 seconds or so and beyond. What do you feel? What are some of those things when an employee gets emotional or that difficult moment comes up? Drop 1 or 2 or 3 words in the chat just to make sure we've got a sense of what do you feel. Yep. Dread, here we go again. It gets repeated, doesn't it? It's like I've been in this awkward position again and still don't know quite how to handle it. Or what am I going to do? Or what are they going to do next? Here's something that I really would want you to understand before anything else. The reason that you struggle in these moments is not a character flaw. It's not a weakness. And it's not a sign that you are not cut out for leadership. What it is, it's a skills gap. And the good news is it's fixable. Now, when you think about why you got promoted in the first place, you're technically strong, you knew how the business worked, you delivered results, you were good at the job, but nobody promoted you because you were brilliant at responding when someone cried in your office, or when a team member accused you in front of everyone, or when a client shared something personal and you had to figure out what to do with that. Basically, you weren't trained for that. You've picked up skills, no doubt, along the way, but there is also a skills gap because you're very good and been focused on the area of work that you do. Think about it. Where were you supposed to learn this? So there is that moment of not knowing. And it's like, why are you in this situation? Because of that. You've been promoted because of your technical ability, your knowledge of the business, your knowledge of whatever it is that you're doing. And that question really is, where did you learn this? Who taught you? And how? And now you're just expected to know this stuff without having had that chance to practice of how to stay present when somebody gets emotional, how to manage your own reactions, that dread that you feel, and that sense of repetition. I think about a manager I worked with some years ago. He was brilliant at his job, genuinely competent, respected by the organization. But whenever a team member got emotional, upset, frustrated, or tearful, even worse, he completely shut down. He'd give a very brief, very awkward response and get out of the room as fast as he could. And he thought there was something wrong with him, that other managers could handle this fine and that he just couldn't. But sometimes that itself is a bit of a myth because you think other people are doing well with it, but often within a business, it's even difficult to talk about this with some of your colleagues at the same level that you might be in managing people. So you get that sense of isolation that you're the only one that can't do this as well as everybody else. And the fact is, there was nothing wrong with him. He just hadn't been given the tools. Nobody taught him what to do when emotion came into the room the way it so often does. And every awkward moment had chipped away at his confidence a little more. And he started dreading those one-on-ones and those conversations that should have been easy. And that's the skills gap. And it compounds. So when you don't manage it and it feels harder, the next one is going to be a combination of the last one and this one. And so it can compound and make it even more difficult. But it doesn't have to be like that. And that's what we're going to address today with some thinking that actually works in the real world, not theory, not scripts. So it's a way of seeing what happens so you can stay present when it matters most. Let's just think about these three responses that make it worse. When somebody brings you something that's emotionally charged in a conversation, most managers do one of three things automatically. Each one feels natural in the moment because it's what you do, but each one signals exactly the same thing to the other person, and that is, I can't really handle this. So let me show you what I mean by that. So of these three responses, the first one is to go silent. Now, that's when the manager in that opening story where the client shared something really difficult, that manager said nothing. Silence feels safe. It feels even respectful because he didn't want to say the wrong thing. He was confused and it felt like he was giving them space. But here's what the other person experiences when you go silent, and that is, did he even heal me? Does he care? Can I bring my real challenges to this person? The silence creates a distance and the relationship pulls back a little. I was watching a favorite TV program at the moment. It was Riot Women. And there was a moment where a middle-aged woman, school teacher, tells her manager, her principal, I think it was, that she was almost going to commit suicide last week. And it was beautifully portrayed. His silence, he just sat there and looked at her, and she was waiting for him to respond. And then he asked her a trivial kind of question that was unrelated to that, almost like he didn't hear it. And it was such a stark look. You've got to be ready for when somebody says something that even as challenging as that they're suicidal, how you can respond. And if you can have a way of being ready for that really extreme bit, then everything else is going to be a lot easier than that. So that's number one, you go silent. Number two, you make it about your feelings. And this is such a common way that people have of responding. I was talking with one person and she told me this story that has stayed with me. She said, I've got a terminal cancer diagnosis. I've probably got about 9 to 12 months to live, but she was still able to work. And she stopped telling people this, not because she didn't want the support, but because every person that she told got upset. And she found herself looking after them rather than the other way around. And it became a double burden because so often what people said was, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. And immediately the focus becomes on their sorrow and their challenge of hearing that. And she said it just became too big a burden for her to tell other people because it would upset them so much. So she kept it. And so that is not a useful thing, even though it sounds very empathetic. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Actually is about your sorrow, not about the other person. So instead of saying that, here's a thing that you could just simply say, that sounds really difficult. Tell me more about what's going on, or how's that been for you? And then it's not about you, it's completely or almost completely about them. So that's the second thing a lot of people do. And the third thing is to make it about you. And my little example recently is A few weeks ago, I injured my leg quite badly in a cycling accident. It was a very minor accident, but the result was I couldn't walk for a couple of weeks and my leg was swollen, and it's recovered now. But when people heard about it, a few would, or if they knew about it, they would say, "How's your leg?" And then I'd say, "Oh, it's going, the swelling's going down a bit," or whatever it was. But they would then immediately launch into a story about their own accident. And in one case, the accident had happened about 15 years ago, and they spent several minutes telling me every detail while I was still on crutches. And what I needed was someone to be present with me. But what I got was someone who needed to talk about themselves. And I see this constantly happening, not with injuries, but with everything, where someone mentions a difficult family situation, you jump in with your own. Somebody shares a struggle at work, you tell them about a similar struggle that you've had. And it's not malicious, but it's how most people, most of us were in fact wired a bit like this. We think we connect through shared experience, but these moments actually push people away. And rather than saying, "I know exactly how you feel," or "the same thing happened to me," you don't want to say that. You say, just instead say, "That sounds really hard. What's been the toughest part of it?" You might say. So those three responses, going silent, making it about your feelings, or making it about you in your story, these are just three very typical ways that people have of responding when they don't actually know how to manage the other person's feelings or that emotion that's present. The next question would be, really, why is it that this happens? Why do you freeze? Why is it that you can't go it again, that dread? What happens even when you end up saying, "Here we go again," which is just such a typical response, really, isn't it? There's a moment in difficult conversations where your brain just stops and you can't think, you can't access words, that maybe you feel even a bit blindsided by whatever it is this other person's saying. You go blank and you say something that you immediately regret. Now, that's not weakness, but that is basically your amygdala activating. Daniel Goleman, who wrote the book Emotional Intelligence, talks about the amygdala hijack, because the amygdala is really about your survival. It activates so that you become very alert, because every time there's something emotional, somebody's angry, upset, tearful, accusatory, your amygdala registers that as potential danger. And it kicks in before your prefrontal cortex, or the thinking part of your brain, has a chance to understand, let alone to respond. So it's absolutely automatic and very quick. The amygdala is why we still stay alive. Your nervous system then starts to prepare for fight, to flee, or to freeze. And that's exactly what you do. You go silent, or you say something defensive, or you leave the room. Not because you choose to, but because your brain has made the call even before you can think through it. So what do you do about it? And what can you do about that moment? First of all, you want to slow everything down and to be able to breathe, first of all, because your breathing becomes so important. And the most effective interruption that I know that you can do is to name your feelings to yourself. Neuroscientists say this is one of the most crucial things that you can do in the moment. Now, it is predicated on a lot of other ideas. And first of all, that your feelings are neither good nor bad. In a sense, they're good because they tell you something about yourself, but there's no such thing as a bad emotion. There are feelings that we don't like and feelings that we do. We like being happy, joyous, free, or whatever, relaxed. And we don't like feeling sad, upset, worried, anxious. But that doesn't make them bad feelings, even though in our common language we use that phrase of "I've got a bad feeling." But that good and bad really are judgment words, and you don't want to be in the area of judgment here. So you want to just much more, when you name your feelings to yourself, you somehow, they move from being unconscious to conscious. And when they become conscious, you've got a lot more control over them. You might just be saying, not out loud, but internally, I'm feeling rattled right now. I'm feeling defensive. I don't know what to say, and I'm scared of getting it wrong. Any of these things, you admitting the reality, and that those feelings no longer dominate you because you at least now have a name for them. And that simple act of naming your feelings neurologically shifts the activation away from the amygdala and back towards the prefrontal cortex. It creates a tiny pause. It activates the language center of your brain. Again, it activates the ability to think a little bit more simply by naming your feelings. Now, it does take practice to do this, and it does take practice learning not to judge yourself because of what you're feeling. There's a certain vulnerability about it, isn't there? And some of these feelings you certainly wouldn't say out loud to somebody, and it's even hard enough to say it to yourself and admit to yourself that you're feeling scared. And here you are, a senior manager, you're 50 years old, and still, when somebody says something, it can make you feel scared, worried, anxious. This is really one of the challenges of managing emotions, is to take away the judgment or the shame in feeling these things and to be able to hold yourself and be yourself. This is where curiosity becomes a really important part, because you might not be able to do it in the moment, but afterwards you might go back and say, how interesting that when that person said this to me, I felt scared. I wonder what that's related to. So you bring your curiosity to those moments, and that will help you move forward and become more accepting of yourself. Now, sometimes you can say those things out loud, but often it might confuse the other person. What you could say, look, I want to respond to this and I'm not quite sure what to say. Funnily enough, I was at the gym this morning and I met a friend whose husband, he's got leukemia, and I went and said to her, how are things? And she said, oh, they're not good. And in that moment, even though I practiced this myself, I didn't know what to say. And so I was looking around for other words, and she actually coached me. She said, there are no words, are there? And I went, oh gosh, yes, that's right. I teach this stuff. Knowing it and practicing it is an ongoing work for all of us, because sometimes these moments, they just pop up when you don't actually expect them. Being able to say that, even I'm not quite sure what to say, is not a weakness. It's being present with somebody. That's someone who's real. You're being real, who's actually heard what was said and who cares enough to get it right. Compare that to the awkward silence or the clumsy deflection. And which one would you rather receive if you were in that situation yourself? So naming your feelings first is the interruption that makes everything else possible. And once you've done that, once you've got that half second back, people can feel it. The goal is to be real. This whole way of responding to people is really about being present, being present with somebody, being able to name what's going on. Is where empathy becomes possible. When you have managed to calm yourself down and be present with somebody. Now, all of this does relate also to understanding the foundation of it, which comes from transactional analysis. I love this. I saw this as a chapter heading in a book once, The OK Corral, and it comes from a book called I'm OK, You're OK. But these four positions, a very useful way of understanding how you are working. And the first one to look at is I'm OK, you're not OK. And when you think about the way that you might talk about difficult people, even calling them difficult people for a start, or a difficult person, is I'm OK, you're not OK. I'm superior, you're the problem, is that kind of stance. The second one is I'm not OK, you're OK. And that is I'm inferior, and I need to manage our relationship, and I need to be somehow subservient to you or answerable to you. is I'm not okay, you're okay. And the third one, I'm not okay, you're not okay, where everything is hopeless. So I'm no good at managing this, and this whole place around me is a bit hopeless. And then the fourth one is I'm okay, you're okay. I'm a capable adult, and so are you, and that's how we can relate. Now, it is quite a challenge, actually, to be in the I'm okay, you're okay position constantly, because if you go back and think about the way that your brain reacts to perceived threats. So when somebody is asking a difficult question or saying something or accusing you or telling you something that's highly emotional that you're not quite sure how to respond to, your brain is going to react. This is some kind of a threat. And so seeing them still as okay is one of the biggest challenges. But it's such a fundamental, important thing to be aware of. And being able to reframe and notice, first of all, what you're thinking, the position that you are in, and to be able to change that to I'm okay, you're okay. I was thinking about a manager who was dealing with a team returning to work at the office. Working from home had become such a common thing and a popular thing, but they needed people to come back into the office so that they could have more meetings and coordinate a lot of the work. And every conversation felt like a battle to him. Every pushback felt like an attack. And he saw his team as resistant against him. He was constantly bracing himself. And then through our work together, he was able to make this shift. He re-examined his starting point, his own attitude going into these conversations. And he realized the problem wasn't with them. It was how he was seeing the whole situation. And so he realized if he took this position of I'm okay, you're okay, this opened up things for him. I reminded him of this phrase, which I actually got from Chris Voss, who's a great teacher in negotiations. They're not against me, they are for themselves. It's such a useful way of looking at these difficult moments. They're not against me, they are for themselves. And that one shift for him changed everything. And he could actually hear what was important to them. He could talk about what really mattered, and still, he still felt their frustration, but he wasn't defensive anymore because he wasn't standing in enemy territory. He was standing in the I'm okay, you're okay position. And with that, the difficult person stopped being difficult. They became a human being with needs and concerns of their own. And that's not naive, that's powerful, because you can only really influence someone that you're genuinely trying to understand. So this is why the I'm okay, you're okay position is so important in working with people like this. You name your own feelings first. To interrupt that freeze, you stand in the I'm okay, you're okay position, and remember, they're not against you, they're for themselves. Now you're ready to do something with it. So let's talk about what this might actually look like. So what do confident managers do in those first few seconds? I called it the first 8 seconds, but it might be 10 or it might be a lot quicker. So what happens with these difficult situations is most people either freeze, they go into defense mode, or they're reaching for the first thing that comes out of their mouth. And confident managers do 4 specific things that they're not what you might expect. And I've mentioned these already, a couple of these in passing, but they need to be repeated because they are difficult to put into practice. And the first thing is to breathe. Now, this is not dramatically, that could be a deep sigh, oh my God, here we go again. Not like that, but this is often the breathing, not visibly, but just deeply and slowly. That's it. And it's not to create a performative calmness, not to look composed, but to actually be composed. By breathing, you calm the amygdala and you activate the vagus nerve, which is the largest nerve in the body, goes right from the brainstem through to all your organs and helps you to calm down. It's connected to a lot of those organs, and we have even popular words. We've got a gut feeling, we've a broken heart, we've got a shitty liver. All of these things are connected to this large nerve. And by breathing, you activate that nerve to create the parasympathetic nervous system, and that is to be non-reactive. When you breathe slowly, you're giving more oxygen to the prefrontal cortex of your brain, which is where you do the thinking and you have the ability to relate. I've often run workshops, and we do 1 week and come back the next week at the end of the 2 sessions, and I say to somebody, what have you got from this workshop? And they say, what I realize is the importance of breathing. And imagine them going back to work saying, what did you learn? Oh, I learned about breathing. This has a much more powerful thing than you might imagine. All right. And then what's the next thing they do? They name their feelings to themselves. So what really confident managers are not afraid of what they feel, and being able to say to themselves and to say, I'm rattled, I'm feeling accused, I don't know what to say here, I'm embarrassed, I'm frightened. Any of those things that we talked about earlier, this is the neurological interruption, and it brings you back online. It's not therapy, but it's a 2-second internal check that makes conscious the unconscious. And you might be aware that when things are unconscious, they are much more powerful. And by making them conscious, you take control. You've got better control of what you're feeling. And the third thing that confident managers do is that they agree that this matter is important to the person. Now, it might seem very trivial to you when you're listening to the other person, what they're saying, but when you acknowledge that this is important to you, you're doing something that's very powerful for the other person. You're not necessarily agreeing with the content of what they're saying, but you are agreeing with the feeling that the other person has, that the level of importance that this is for them. And the solution that they are proposing, you may never be able to put into practice, but you can still acknowledge that this is a big deal for you. This is something you've thought a lot about, and being able to show that through your body language, your tone of voice, your presence, and by noticing what that other person is feeling, what is important to them, and letting them know. You don't necessarily say, I know exactly what you feel, or sometimes people make a parody of, I hear what you say, but that's just telling people that you hear it. What you need to do is show them that you get what they're on about. And you do that by naming their feelings to them, by being able to say, this is important to you. You are worried. You're feeling really confused. You're feeling that even I haven't been listening to you. So that is what you agree with, whether it's true or not, that you haven't been listening to them, but that's what they're feeling. That's what you're acknowledging. Now, one of the ways you can do this is if you tune into what you're feeling yourself. So your feelings can guide you to what the other person might be feeling, especially if you can't get it quite so easily. So you might be feeling accused, the other person might be feeling unheard, or you're feeling unsure, they might be feeling vulnerable or unheard themselves, or you're feeling overwhelmed by whatever it is that they're shared, they might be feeling completely alone with it, for instance. And then when you get that sense that you can name it. Now, I have a picture here of a parent with a little baby, and the way that we often acknowledge what the baby is feeling, whether it's happy, we give a happy face, and whether it's crying, we pucker up a little bit and go, oh dear. Now, there's something natural about the way we do that with a baby, but when the baby grows up, and particularly with adults, we are much less inclined to do it, but it is still needed. Everybody needs somebody to acknowledge what they are feeling, and without judgment, just to be able to say, yeah, this is difficult. So this is where in the Tough program, I've developed this concept of when somebody goes ape, the APE model is there's an action, a perception, and an emotion. And so often when you are confronted by somebody and they're highly emotional, they're saying something, the temptation is for you to either respond to the action, I can fix that, that's easy, or the perception, you want to correct that. No, that's not what happened. I did actually let you know that, something like that. But invariably, that does not work. What you need to do is to respond to the emotion. That is such a primary thing. It's counterintuitive. So being able to make this your first response, because you've breathed, you've calmed yourself down, you've got a much better ability to acknowledge what they are feeling. And so the language for that might be, it sounds like this has been really frustrating for you, or I can hear that this is being weighing on you, or that sounds incredibly hard. I'm glad that you told me. I want to make sure I understand what you're going through. Some of those words let the other person know that you are hearing them without judgment. And you don't have to make an immediate decision on whether you agree or don't agree with what they're proposing, but you can always acknowledge what it is that they are feeling. You don't have to make a judgment about that. So notice what all of those statements have in common. They are about the other person. They're not about you. They're not about the problem. They're not about the solution. They just say, I see you, I hear you, you're not alone in this. But rather than telling them that you see or that you hear, or telling them, hey, you're not alone in this, by actually making those statements much more direct, they experience you as seeing, hearing, being with them. And that's what makes the change. So let me give you a quick scenario to make this concrete. A team member comes to you clearly upset. I feel nothing I do is ever good enough. I'm working flat out and no one notices. Now, the automatic response might be to defend, explain, problem solve. Yeah, we are under a lot of pressure at the moment, or we did say thank you last month at a team meeting, something ridiculous. But the confident response, you want to breathe, name your feelings. I'm feeling a bit strung out by that. But what you want to do is you want to agree that it matters. This is real for them, and using my feelings as a clue that they feel invisible or unappreciated. And then you can say, sounds like you've been putting a huge amount in and it hasn't felt like that's been seen. Tell me more about what that's been like for you. And you haven't solved anything yet, but what you've done is something even more important. You've created trust. You've kept the conversation open and you've stayed present instead of defending or deflecting. And from there, the real conversations can happen. Why does this matter? First of all, it does actually directly relate to profitability and effectiveness in your work, in the work of your team, the work of your organization. So, if that's not a good enough reason, here's an even better reason why this matters. And that is, it's about your energy, your enjoyment for the work, and your career, which are all at stake. And if you're going to be managing people, you want to do it in a way that you can really enjoy the work. This doesn't have to be a huge burden to manage people. It is possible. And in fact, when you do this, you increase your enjoyment of the work. When I started working with frontline people in a bank, the bank tellers were getting problems from their customers. I gave them the skills to be able to respond when customers were upset and angry about their money. And the customers really appreciated the fact that the tellers were responding in this way and acknowledging what they were feeling, what their difficulties were. And their enjoyment went up immensely for the work, and they no longer were dreading these difficult customers who were coming in because they knew they had the skills how to deal with it. And so this same problem and same challenge works when you are managing a team. Before I get into the Q&A bit, then you might each have a question or some comments that you want to ask about or notice. Let me just say briefly what the free game plan call is. It's an opportunity for you to reflect on your work, to have a one-on-one conversation with me about this. It'll take ideally about 45 minutes. We can explore the situation, what's working, what's not, what's the gap. Time for you to think about the way that you manage tension and conflict. And this means that you have new insights into how you can move forward. Plus, I'll answer any of the other questions about your unique situation. And at the end of our time together, you'll have at least 3 insights about how to move forward towards conflict-free leadership in your own life. You'll have a new appreciation of your strengths and your challenges, and you'll have energy and encouragement to keep developing yourself as a leader, however you might do that. After the meeting, we can both decide if we're a good fit for each other. Will you go it alone or will you join the program? Because that's a choice that you've got, and you might realize that you can do this on your own, in which case I would encourage you immensely, because I want you to enjoy your work managing people, and I want the people that you manage to enjoy having you as their manager. If you decide to go it alone, you'll have these insights on what you can do about it. And if you want to join the program, we can work out some of the details about that. So now, what about any questions that you might have? What's come up as we've gone through them, just unmute and ask that question. Is there any specific type of conversation that you find hardest, where you get angry, sad, accusatory? Has anyone tried naming their feelings? Have you tried naming your feelings to yourself mid-conversation? What happened? And is there someone in your life that is hardest to apply this with? Let's see if you've got any questions.
No questions, John, but it's always good to resurface all those things, all those learnings, and those always sounds like common sense when you present that, but it's much harder to implement, as you highlight yourself during the session.
Yes.
In a situation now, you're going to slow yourself down and now you might throw that in response rather than react and all those things. So it just takes ongoing, and lots of you will benefit from it. So it's certainly your certain advocate and try to promote it internally as well with our business.
Yep. And it is constant practice, isn't it, as well? Knowing some of these things is one thing, but how to keep doing it is another challenge.
Yeah, it's not a set and forget, that's for sure. And everyone has to find their own way to keep that top of mind, however you do that, scheduling things, whatever, review last week, whatever it is. So I think definitely, keep a list of tools people could apply. So I can see that you have those great video newsletters. So I think I need over time, I'm looking for all the different tools and try which ones are applicable in that point in time or that situation, because there's no one size fits all. So definitely key to learn more about available tools and then give more like a little bit new tooling.
Yeah. So would you like to have a game plan conversation where we can go through what it is that you're wanting to get for yourself?
I think I'm good for now, and I just said and see how we go. But definitely, might be contact again maybe in a month's time, and then see after that session, you see what I managed to implement, what I can't. Then I have a much better view where the strengths, where the weaknesses are.
Yes.
It's work and those things. It takes a bit of time and reflection.
Yeah. Okay. I'll make contact with you next month, and just could be really useful for you to have a good assessment of how the month has gone, how you've implemented some of these things. I'd love to have that with you. Let's finish there.